Call the Teaching and Learning Committee meeting to order, January 22nd. It is 5:29 p.m. Roll call. Ms. Higginbotham.
Here.
Mr. Pollack.
Here.
Mr. Ewert, here. Item 2, agenda revisions and approval.
Move to approve the agenda.
Second.
Mr. Pollack with the motion, Ms. Higginbotham with the second. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
That passes. Item 4, approval of minutes, December 18th, 2023 committee minutes.
Motion to approve the December 18th, 2023 committee minutes.
Second.
Ms. Higginbotham with the motion, Mr. Pollack with the second. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
That passes. Item 5, reports and updates. Item 5A, academic career planning. Mr. Miziak.
Coming up. All right, hopefully that stops. All right. Tonight I brought another special guest speaker for you. So this is Miss Alex Fisher from GHS. She's been leading a team of primarily high school teachers, but there is some middle school representation on her ACP committee. And tonight we have brought to you a report surrounding academic and career planning. And Alex is going to fill you in on some of the work that she has done with her team. PI 26 of the Wisconsin State Statutes mandates that all students engage in academic and career planning in grades 6 through 12 as outlined in the district's Education for Employment Plan. PI 26 requires the Ed for Employment Plan to be reviewed and, if necessary, updated on an annual basis. So this is similar to what Brittany had brought to you, something that we will bring to you on an annual basis for you to review and then update if needed. Tonight, Alex is bringing to you two key pieces of the Ed for Employment Plan, which includes the Portrait of the Graduate and the Readiness Scorecard, as well as she'll provide you with some background on the Ed for Employment Plan. So I will hand it over to Alex.
All right, good evening. As Jake stated, I'm Alex Fisher. I serve in two roles at the high school. I'm both the Dean of Students as well as the Academic and Career Planning Coordinator. Today I'm going to talk to you about some of the work we've been doing for informational purposes and to get your feedback to eventually solicit your approval on some of these components. So I'll first touch on the Education for Employment Plan, which is really the compliance piece of ACP. Then the Portrait of a Graduate, which is about establishing a vision and a mission for what we want all of our GHS graduates to obtain upon graduation, and then a scorecard for measuring the success of our Portrait of a Graduate. You can skip this slide. So as Jake stated, academic and career planning is a requirement as part of state statute for grades 6 through 12, but it is recommended for K through 12, as we know that academic and career planning, while we don't necessarily think about our 4K 5-year-old students planning for college, they are starting to have those basic conversations around what is a job, what are needs versus wants, and the things that go along with academic and career planning. The E4E plan is the document that allows us to become in compliance with the state. If you click into in this guide, or the other one, Chris, up top. This is the general outline of what these required components are for our ACP or E4E plan. So when creating our E4E plan, I followed this fairly closely and used the template that the state required. So now if you go back to the other one that you opened, I have started to build this kind of from scratch. As you scroll through each section, it basically outlines all of the activities, resources, and opportunities we offer Germantown students as part of our academic and career plan, as well as our goals and aspirations moving forward as a program. So first there you'll see our 6-12 ACP scope and sequence. As I stated, it is required state that we offer a curriculum around academic and career planning by the state. We specifically use the Zello platform, which is the state recommended program, to deliver those lessons. So the scope and sequence is essentially built around that Zello program, and those lessons include things such as how to interview for a job, building a resume, understanding the difference between needs and wants, some financial planning things. So 21st century skills you would want students to engage in order to be prepared for life after high school. We also outline several of the credentials and opportunities we offer for students to get experiences in high school early on. So some of our industry-based credentials, youth apprenticeship and co-op, the organizations that we expose students to, and most notably our career pathways, which this was essentially the work of Mr. Smith and Mr. Rooney over the past year and a half before I arrived. We have 17 career pathways that outline the courses as well as the organizations and programming we offer for students. For example, for advanced manufacturing, we have a document that is used as a communication tool to show families these are the classes at GHS we could use to prepare students for that pathway, as well as recommended careers, the level of necessary education, and then the financial outcome for those. And we have 6 that are regionally approved by the state of Wisconsin, which is the max that are currently available. So overall, this document just outlines our plan of items that we currently implement around academic and career planning. Anything that has a red asterisk is something that we have newly implemented this year or are in the process of implementing for next year. You'll notice that at the top there was 2 sections that were highlighted in yellow, and that is because we cannot complete them because we do not have those components yet created at GHS. So that has been the heart of the work I've been working on for ACP, and that's the portrait of the graduate as well as the scorecard. So at this time, before I move on to the actual portrait of a graduate and the scorecard, I'm going to pause to see if there are any questions around the E for E plan itself.
So this is more a guide for our parents and probably guidance to work with the student on the pathways portion of this? Is that what we're...
The E for E plan, I would say, is not, parents could view it, but I would view it as more of an internal document outlining everything we do to, as part of our ACP programming. The pathways are specifically listed on our academic and career planning website, and we refer families to those around course planning time, but that's just one component. This document is necessary for state compliance.
Yeah, and I think last year we talked more about the pathways about this time of year, and this is kind of the continuing building of that robust end of this program and complying with the state, but really outline our district's kind of mission behind all of this.
Correct, because this document would not have been able to be built without the career pathways being in place. So same as the portrait of the graduate and the scorecard, we can't complete and approve this E for E plan without those pieces being established first.
Thank you.
Any other questions before we move on?
Just a comment, I mean, it's a lot of information there and well put together and easy to kind of go through, so it's user-friendly for, parents and students to both go through, so just wanted to commend you on a good job at putting this together and look forward to, finishing those other 2 components.
Thank you, and we'll continue to add to this as well and continue to grow this program, as I feel it is probably the most applicable to our students, as every student is planning for something after high school. Okay. So then within this, we have our portrait of a graduate. A portrait of a graduate is essentially a vision and a mission for what a successful Germantown graduate will look like. It consists of the attributes, the dispositions, and the attributes and the dispositions and the values we want to instill in all graduates by the time that they leave here. And that's the core of why we're doing this work, because we want to determine, are our students really college, career, and life ready? And the mode we have taken to develop this portrait of a graduate, as well as the scorecard, is using national and state recommendations as the basis for our development, as well as, of course, incorporating our own community values within them. So if you click on the national link, the national recommendation, if you just scroll down to that little picture there, is they have these little buckets that they recommend. So academic readiness, workplace and college ready, future focused, life ready, civic minded, and financially savvy. And within those are dispositions we would hope all graduates would have to be successful within the 21st century. And so we kept these recommendations in mind in those key buckets when building each of these statements. If you go back to the presentation and click the state recommendations, the state defines this as the Redefining Ready Network, so I would encourage you to look through this site for further information, but specifically if you click the readiness scorecards up at the top, there are recommendations for the scorecard on the metrics we would use, and they're closely aligned with our state report card. So the purpose of this scorecard will essentially be to support our growth in our ACP program and find areas that we can improve our system to better service all of our students. These scorecards are developed at every level. We're taking a top-down approach because graduates are graduating from the high school, but the middle school and the elementary schools, again, are working to develop that graduate. So we're starting with a portrait of the graduate at the high school, but the long-term goal will be to roll it out at the various levels, all working towards the end goal of a GHS graduate. So within our committee, did you skip one?
Do you want the examples or?
Yeah. If you would like, you can look through the different examples, but other districts are doing this work as well. They all take various approaches, which again, you can look at individually. Some are really focused on the data piece. Others are focused on the attributes and the dispositions. We kind of took a hybrid approach because I'm a math person. I think data speaks, but I also think that the things we value as a school need to be represented as well. So as an ACP committee, we developed a vision statement and mission statements based off of the information I presented. Think of the vision statement as a branding line for GHS. So when you think about Nike, you think about their slogan, "Just do it." And that holds value to their brand. So for the GHS brand, Warhawks are soaring towards college, career, and life readiness because that is the end goal for all students. Where soaring is an acronym that we used the buckets, which are in parentheses, that were based off of the national recommendation. So strives to grow academically, with the key word being grow, as all students are going to have varying levels of academic success, but what we're focused on as educators is that they are showing growth from the time they start with us in 9th grade to the time that they leave our building. Orchestrates future goals and plans. So that's really the heart of ACP, that all students have a plan for after high school, whatever that may look like, and that we're facilitating that process at the high school. Actualizes their potential as an individual, so bringing it to reality who they are as people in their own regards. Responsibly carries out their civic duties. So I think this is where the parent involvement comes in, because this is really a team effort. There's a lot of stakeholders involved in developing a graduate. So I think of the most basic example of, students registering to vote when they're 18. We obviously can't make students do that as educators, but the parent involvement piece in developing that. Immerses in self-reflection, because without reflecting on our individual aspirations as well as who we are as people, we cannot grow. navigates finances responsibly, which is something we're kind of ahead of the game on compared to other districts in the state because we require all students to take that financial literacy class, which is now going to be a state mandate for all high schools, so we're ahead of the curve on that. And then grows in 21st century skills being things such as digital literacy and citizenship, so things that people need to be successful in our ever-changing society. From those statements, we have brought this to stakeholders for feedback from, so far I've been to every elementary building leadership team, as well as a high school PTA meeting. I've brought it to the entire high school staff, as well as an elementary PTA, and I'll be going to the middle school in February to receive feedback on those statements as well. And then lastly, the scorecard. We can say we're doing all of those nice things, and we can aspire to do so, but unless we are tracking, are our students actually college, career, and or life ready? We don't really know. So what we've developed is our own scorecard based off of the state recommendations with metrics to define what would be considered a college ready, a career ready, and or a life ready graduate. None of the numbers in here are accurate because we're just selecting buckets at this time or items to measure, but these are the items we will use as indicators for each category, as well as within each indicator category, how many of those would we expect a student to achieve in order to be considered career, college, or life ready. For example, in the college column, I wouldn't expect a student to hit all 5 of those for me to say that they are college ready, but what our committee is discussing is how many of those indicators. We met this afternoon and we talked about 3 of those 5 possibly. And then the final remark I'll make on this scorecard is I would anticipate or would like all students to be college, career, and life ready regardless of their pathway. And I know the common sentiment is, well, not all students are going to college. That is correct. So I like to think of the college indicator section as more of an academically rigorous challenge or finding academic success in some area, which we would hope that all students do. And then the purpose of this document is not to be a student-facing document for them to put themselves into buckets. Well, I didn't meet these criteria, so I must not be ready for this. It's more so meant for internal use, for us to evaluate as educators. If we are saying we value workplace learning experiences, but only 10% of our students are involved in that component, what can we do as a school to get more students involved in it? So it's primarily for internal use to improve our practices. And that wraps up my information piece on the portrait of the graduate and the scorecard. So now if there are any questions or comments on that component.
Michael?
There's a lot in here, and I especially like the financial piece you have in there. I think a lot of students don't necessarily understand the difference between needs and wants, or what it takes to have money. A great engineer once told me, to have money, you either need to make more or spend less. You know, it's that simple. But I'm also wondering, because we're trying to have our students ready for the world when they leave here, is there anywhere a unit on ethics? You know, it's difficult to teach virtue, but I think students need to know that, you know, when they get out in the real world, they may be faced with some ethical decisions at their place of employment. And what I mean by that is, for myself, let's say I have a piece of equipment that the company I work for sells that doesn't make rating. You know, I can be a more likable guy if I don't complain about that piece of equipment not making rating, but if I have ethics and virtue, we shouldn't be selling a piece of equipment that doesn't make rating. So I often joke that my most important engineering class I had was my ethics class. Because, you know, once you get out in the real world, you're faced with all sorts of things that involves ethics, and I think students maybe need to be ready for it when it happens. So,
Yeah, absolutely. While the Zello lessons do not have an ethics lesson embedded in them, I would almost guarantee in some capacity that in courses such as, our Project Lead the Way classes and our tech ed classes, and likely even some of our social studies classes, teachers often do bring up those when they're having discourse with students. I couldn't cite a specific example, but I think it happens probably a little more authentically than a standalone lesson, if that makes sense.
okay, sure, yeah, very good.
Anybody else? I appreciate the clarification on it not being a student-facing document. Obviously, when I saw that, there's a lot that can go into that, and a student could or couldn't take out of it. Maybe not that they're not aware of it existing, but I do feel it is a good check and balance for our district to ensure we are meeting our goals or working towards at least those goals. And it really provides us data to work from and help guide, hey, we say X, but we're not achieving it, or we're achieving high and Y, right? And it gives us a path to recorrect if need be, or to continue pushing further in where we're going. So as this program continues to be built out, I think it's only going to serve this district justice in a waypoint and a guidance as we move forward for each one of these children. So I really appreciate your hard work in it.
Thank you.
We can't be afraid of the data, is really what it comes down to. If there's a piece of this that is falling short, we need to know, and we need to know like where or how we can start to improve it. So this, I totally understand too that this being, the scorecard being internal, in an ideal world too though, I would like to think that we'd be able to tweak it in some way to be able to share this with the community as well. Or not necessarily everything, but aspects of this so that the community knows, here we are now, here's where we want to be, and then 2, 3, 4 years from now, the progress that we've made. So.
Yeah, I think on that point, Mr. Pollock, the maturity of the work that Alex and her team are doing will lend itself to 2 presentations we have tonight at the board level in future years. We have an annual assessment report that we started last year. The scorecard will be a component of that, of how we're measuring beyond our standardized assessment. And then we have teachers from Amy Bell presenting on school learning and student learning objectives. This scorecard lends itself to be this is what we're aiming for to exceed at the high school level, tiered down to the middle school, beyond just standardized tests, all-around college, career, and life readiness. So the work that they're building foundationally will lead to future continuous improvement in the district and hopefully strategic planning around those areas.
Very good. Anything else? Thank you. If there's nothing else, we can move on to 5B. It'll be reading pilot update number 5. That is an increasing number. Hopefully we got good news.
2 more than planned, so
Yes.
let's keep going. As promised, monthly, I am bringing to you an update on the pilots that we have conducted at the elementary and the middle school. I'll start with the middle school. The middle school, again, is piloting 2 separate resources that are connected to what we're using at the elementary level. So at Kennedy, they're using StudySync and Into Literature. There's a small little gap that's happening at the middle school right now as they're engaged in a writing unit. So they will be picking up, for the most part, in the second piece of their pilot. So their pilot is slightly different than what we ran at the elementary level. They're in a stacked type fashion because the middle school lends itself to using units, whereas at the elementary level, just the nature of the program and the nature of the readers didn't lend itself to that. So the middle school will be and has started using the second resource that there is, so they'll have a comparison on a teacher level between those two. So in December and January, the reading review team met to evaluate the pilots and to determine if there was any additional information that they needed in the decision-making process. So right now, what I've presented to you so far, we've talked, and we will talk tonight about parent data, student data, and then the teacher rubric data. And they thought at this point we've collected a lot of the information that we would need to make an informed decision regarding the 3 resources that we've piloted at the elementary level. The last thing that we're waiting for is some information from the state. Act 20 has formed the Reading Council, as I've spoken about before. There was some talk that there would be some information released in January, and now I'm hearing rumblings that that official date might be pushed out even further. So I'll talk about that in a little bit here. The reading review team took a look at the rubric, so I solicited some initial feedback around the rubric before teachers used it. I followed up with them. We met after school, and one of the things that they did was they evaluated each one of the components that was on there to make sure that they were necessary and fully evaluated what we were looking for. The teachers agreed that what we did was a comprehensive look at it, so they didn't think the rubric was really missing anything in terms of what we were looking for in terms of a reading resource. So the information that's there should be a valid assessment of each one of the resources. We've secured materials for all 3 of the pilots to extend this out as long as we need to, given the flexible timing of Act 20 and when we might know that information and when we would be ready to move forward. All 3 of the pilot companies have worked with me so that we can essentially extend this as long as we need to. That buys us a little bit of time so that we can see where the state is going in terms of their recommendations regarding Act 20. One important note that I can tell you is all 3 of the resources that we're using meet the criteria for Act 20. So going forward, none of them would be not approved by the state of Wisconsin in terms of does this resource meet the heart of what Act 20 was supposed to do. What they have not met the criteria for yet is whether or not they would be reimbursed by the state of Wisconsin. So all 3 of these resources would be resources we would be able to use in future years. It's just whether or not the state would reimburse them. There's a couple criteria that you have to meet to be usable. One of them is that they can't use the 3 queuing method as a primary source of instruction. So none of these resources contain that reading component. If you look on Ed Reports, I think I've referenced this before too, all the resources meet the criteria for the science of reading, which is really the philosophy behind Act 20. All the pilot teachers completed the resource rubric to evaluate the effectiveness of each one of the reading resources that they use. So individual teachers filled out the rubric and then provided their feedback to me, and then I kind of compiled that for you in this report. And then principals, teachers, and myself have continued to conduct instructional rounds and be in classrooms to see each one of these resources in action. So the next, in terms of the attachments that I provided for you, I provided the teacher evaluations there, and then I compiled them as a summary score for you. So you can see for each one of the criteria areas, I broke it apart from the K2 level and the 3-5 level, as we've always kind of looked at those 2 things as separate pieces, although 2 of our resources span K5. So the points that I will make, I won't go through each one of these components for you, but I want to provide some clarity around this. If you were to take this and compile it into just one table and look at K2 across the board, and then look at 3-5 across the board, you'll see some trends and patterns in terms of which resources our teachers kind of rated higher than others. And although, for example, Super Kids at K2 pretty much outranks HMH and Wonders in every single, component, or almost every component, I wouldn't look at that as Super Kids as the clear winner of the K2, and that's the decision we should make. I tried to, when we built this rubric, provide success criteria that were aligned to the big component, and what I asked teachers to do was take a look at that success criteria that's listed below, or that criteria that's listed below that's related to that category, and then assess it. We didn't necessarily go through a calibration activity where every one of the teachers would rank the resource exactly the same way. What they did was they evaluated it through their lens while they used it in their classroom with their students. So one of the big takeaways that I would take when we look at these is all three of the resources that we piloted in the classrooms were highly successful in terms of our teachers' ratings related to each one of these categories. So all of them are meeting expectations for our teachers, and all of our teachers, I think, would say these are resources that we could move forward with. So there isn't one on here that we would have eliminated. I think this would be one component that I would then use with the whole scope of all the data that we collected to then evaluate each one of those resources. So we would then take a look at the parent feedback on the resource, and then we look at the student data that correlates to it to see, when we look at this as a complete picture, how would we evaluate the resources? And then I'll pause there if there are questions about the explanation I provided for the evaluations. One of the reasons why I wouldn't say take it as, this is a clear, just because one outranks, they're very small samples. So when you're talking about 5 or 6 teachers who are rating one resource at the K2 level, if one teacher is thrilled with the resource and rates it 4 across the board, you're going to push that 3-point something up a little bit more than others. The feedback when you talk to teachers about all 3 of these resources, most of them are very positive when they talk about just about every element of it. And then in the areas where it's scored lower, one of the things that I look to is this is information that we know on the implementation side. So when we go forward, there are a couple elements for each one of the programs where I could say this is something that we learned during the pilot process that we can then preemptively work towards to address going forward. So an example of that is HMH. If you look at their organization, it's scored low with our teachers, and one of the reasons why it's scored low with our teachers is the overwhelming number of resources that are in HMH. So one of the things is they didn't have a team of teachers to sit down and look through each one of the units, overview the unit, and determine which pieces were most important. They were working sometimes in isolation to determine those pieces. If HMH is what we move forward with UBD, we can proactively create that organization for teachers so that HMH is more usable for all of our teachers if we were to move forward with it.
So that makes great sense. I think you highlighted one that I was going to point out just because that seemed to be a little lower. And I'd say Wonders is in that as well as the 2.8. I had one, I have to scroll, give me 2 seconds here. So one of interest and concern I found was under the supports for teachers.
Yep.
Obviously Wonders would stand out, a bit of a sore thumb there at a 2.1. HMH at a 2.9, Super Kids, this is K through 2.
Yep.
Wonders and 3 through 5 got a 2.6, and HMH actually bumps up to a 3.3 in that realm. Are we seeing that same logic play out there?
Yep. So this is where I'd point to the the decimal piece, where it's when you see one that's a little bit lower than others, don't make huge assumptions, because the training that was provided K2 was the same as the training that was provided 3-5. So that whole group got exactly the same training, and you could see our 3-5 teachers rated Wonders a little bit higher.
We would see that moving forward more specified.
What's that?
We'd see that distinction probably more specified as far as training provided to our staff.
Right, so, and if you were to talk to our Wonders teachers, part of the rating that they provided it, or what they were highlighting there, was the initial training that Wonders provided. So for each one of the companies, the initial conversation we had is what are the things that teachers absolutely need to know day one to jump in and to start working with this resource. Each one of those companies approached it slightly different, and one of the things that happened was teachers talked to each other about the initial support that was provided. Super Kids provided in-person grade level specific support for the units, and our teachers all thought that was great. And then the HMH teachers heard about that, and they said, why didn't we get that kind of training?
Sure.
And part of it's because we just talked to the companies and said, what do you need to offer? So there's that little bit of a relative comparison effect that's going on. But there is something that we definitely learned through that process as to what our teachers prefer. Wonders, the rep that I had from there said, we prioritize our districts that purchase the curriculum, and those dates in August when we had teachers were filled up by all of the different districts that had purchased Wonders and were implementing Wonders this year. So getting in-person support wasn't something that they could offer us. They then followed up with in-person support, and that in-person support was grade level specific and targeted to our teachers, and they absolutely loved it. And there's the Wonders is a tale of two halves for this semester. I'd say the first 2 months, in terms of our teachers' experience with Wonders and how they felt about it, was very different than what we experienced the second half. And there's been a 180 for many of our teachers around Wonders, and part of it was that in-person grade level support, because their understanding of how to use it significantly changed. So again, implementation-wise, we know something that we have to do to make sure that this is successful launching it, because of the way that our teachers responded to it. But I think what teachers are, and what they described to me around that was primarily related to the first piece. If you would have just asked them to rate the in-person support, it would have been exceptionally high, because they very much appreciated their time with the trainer that they sent to us.
And then phonological and phonetic awareness, a large part of why we're here. Obviously, I see Wonders standing out at a 2.4, with HMH at a 3.2, Super Kids at a 3.6. However, I do see Wonders in that's K through 2.
Yep.
I do see Wonders takes a significant bump forward in 3 through 5, while HMH looks like it takes, and I shouldn't use significant, but HMH actually takes a step back to a 2.8 in that.
Yep. Same thing. So one of the things that popped out of here was the scope and sequence that was offered within each one of those programs. It's different than what they have previously experienced. So we do currently have resources that work towards building that awareness, and more of the information that I received around this category was how it compares to what we were already doing in classrooms. I don't think when we kind of talked about this broadly as a reading review team, when they saw these scores, when they were compiled as one, there wasn't necessarily a concern for that element of Wonders or HMH. The Super Kids group would tell you, and by and large, the response from the 5 teachers who piloted Super Kids, they absolutely loved their program, and you can kind of see it in the ratings that they provided, whereas Super Kids is across the board higher. But even when we picked it apart and we took a look at each of these ratings, there wasn't anything that they identified as concern. The reading review team, when they looked at these ratings, more or less what they were talking about was, how did this inform us about each one of the programs? And again, if you talk to the teachers who piloted them, and that may even given a score of a 2 in that area, part of it was they were comparing it to what they had previously seen in that, their years of experience here. They'd say, well, it may have not moved as fast, or the progression had changed. Or one other concern that they had was, especially if you're a second grade teacher, Wonders has an expectation that in kindergarten or in first grade there were some skills that were developed. So now when they were trying it in second grade, that progression seemed off. And it's because, well, there are pieces that could potentially be missing. And that's kind of the nature of the pilot, where we don't have a full implementation where all the kids have had all the different background experiences that sometimes you would expect in second grade. Again, this is something that's important for us to take forward because we're going to have kids who start one of these programs in fifth grade potentially, where there are some pieces that we should be aware of scope and sequence wise that may have come before, and it's the how do we plan for that role so that each one of our students can be successful.
Well, and just to that point then, because we've talked about, obviously Super Kids, if you do look at this information, it looks like Super Kids is off the chart, both for parents and also for teachers. But like you just said, with the certain, if we have Super Kids from K through 2, and then they go to a different program, then they potentially might not be ready, or be missing some component. So how are we going to, figure out is Super Kids, because it is so popular, obviously, with the teachers and the parents, to, one, we have to justify the cost of buying another curriculum, and then how are we going to know how that's going to affect the second to the third grade transition?
Yep, and it's probably the biggest question that stands out with Super Kids is you do create a little bit of difference in your programming when you have two separate resources that you're using. What we've kind of said from the start with the pilots is K2 readers need something different and 3-5 need something different too. So what we're looking for is, when we look at the data as a whole, is does Super Kids outperform Wonders and HMH to the point that we can justify that little bit of transition, because it will be more work, especially on my end, if we have two separate programs working, K2 and 3-5. But if it's what's best for our kids and best for our readers, then that's the decision that we make. And I think our map data, I would have included it tonight, but we were about 2 days behind. We do have the majority of the student data in that I can provide to you very shortly. That you can kind of see how our students performed with each one of those. And then once you see that complete picture of student data, parent data, and our teacher evaluation of the programs, that holistic view of every piece of it, I think that's where we can make the most informed decision. I've said this to Dr. Reuter a few times. I think the benefit that we have is we have 3 resources that I can be confident are going to help develop our readers going forward. And I think the problem that we have is picking the best one out of 3 really good options.
Is there a way to determine if Super Kids already has those components will be met already? Because they might already be in there, as far as, so that transition won't be, they might be ahead.
Yeah, so
actually
what
needed.
Super Kids will tell you is if you can get kids to read by the end of second grade, then it doesn't matter what program you move to after that, because they're going to be strong readers going into third grade. So that's absolutely, that's the philosophy that they kind of have. My initial meetings with them, they stated that the reason why they're a K2 company and not a K5 company is they put all their eggs in the basket of developing high-quality readers at the early ages so that they can focus on the skills that are necessary to develop our youngest of readers. That's why they're specializing in just K2. But planning-wise, absolutely. If we take a look at, once we determine what the resources are that we're going to use, or the resource we're going to use, we do programmatically, from an understanding by design standpoint, need to take a look at what standards are they mastering in second grade, and then how does that transition look to third grade, and are there expectations of that previous learning that there's a gap in that our students might need.
So I think this portion of the process really lends itself to shining a lot of light on all of the curriculum involved here, but more concurrently with what process we choose to implement that. And I don't think that was necessarily the intent from this seat going into it. We just wanted to see what a rating looked like, but it's exciting to see that you guys were able to reverse engineer the process into saying, this is a number this way, this is how we could improve it. And I say that I took the numbers you provided and did some math. So if we were looking for exceeded expectations across all categorical information the teachers were asked to provide input on, let's say they all scored a 4, it'd be 64. Meets would be at 48. And we see going through that, Super Kids lands at a 55.1, HMH of 50.2, Wonders is a 46.6. That's K through 2, and then we have a 52 for HMH and a 56.1 for 3 through 5. And a lot of the conversation we've just had explains, well, some of those numbers could look a little apart, or it's interesting that Wonders finished so far ahead in one and last in the other, but it sounds like we've taken that data and figured out how, if that would be the one we would choose, where we could bump those numbers up in usability for the teachers and the students and effectiveness. So I appreciate that side or that approach to the process. Anything else? And I think we have, is it parent feedback is next?
So same thing. For the parent data, I also compiled that for all of HMH and all of Wonders. I did my best to clean up the data as much as I possibly could because there were some parents who may have indicated that their student was in a resource that didn't exist. So for example, if there was a grade level, we did have a parent who selected Super Kids for grades 3 or 4. So at that point in time, I tried to reverse back to try and figure out if this is a parent of Amy Bell and they're in 4th grade, what resource could they be using? So I did my best to clean up the data so that we're painting as accurate a picture as possible that's going forward. And again, this is one of those surveys that if you take a look at the survey questions that I provided at the end, it'll give you a context for what each one of those responses were. So for example, for the first one, we're looking at how satisfied were you with the program, with a 4 being very satisfied and a 3 being satisfied. And by and large, our parents were satisfied with the programs that their students were using in their classrooms. One of the things that I would say that I learned through this was there's a difference in, again, the way in which the resource was used with our families. So Super Kids has some natural outreach points because there are backpack pages that go home every night. And that visibility, I think, impacted the way in which our parents interacted with Super Kids K2, whereas Wonders and HMH don't have as many touch points that are sent home with parents. And that's, again, something that we can plan for going forward. So with our teachers, how do we build up that communication with families so they're aware of the skills that are being worked on in classrooms? So if there isn't an inherent communication that already exists within the units, how do we build that communication on our end so that we can support reading at home? Because that was probably the biggest takeaway that I had with this was just those simple backpack pages created an awareness amongst our parents of what kids were working on in Super Kids, whereas HMH and Wonders, we had some parents who weren't necessarily aware of which one of the 2 pilots was being used within their classroom. So there was an open-ended question at the very end. I wouldn't say that there were clear themes that came across there. If there was any, that would be it, that how can we create a greater awareness of what students are working on a regular basis within the classrooms so that parents can support at home. Because when they did write a comment, that's the general feel that I got was we want to be able to support our kids at home. We read with them every night. What additionally can we do to support their reading at home? Because to build strong readers, those additional reps that they get at home is something that's important. But again, to Mr. Ewart's point, Super Kids and Ms. Higginbotham's point did outperform both HMH and Wonders in terms of our parent feedback as well. It was, I would say that would be one of the themes in the parent feedback was, one, more Super Kids families filled out the survey, being the smallest proportion of the group, because they were only a K2 group where Wonders and HMH were both K5. So there was a greater awareness around Super Kids, and the common sentiment from our parents was very positive regarding Super Kids.
Jake, you had 126 responses. What was the pool? So what % sample would that be of our parents approximately?
It's a small portion when you compare it to the number of families that were involved in it. I don't have the number off the top of my head, but I can certainly give all members of the board just the percentage of parents who filled it out. It's a small sample when you look at the whole.
Thank you.
How are we doing the student sampling? Are the teachers kind of going through, 'cause obviously, you know, K through 5 kindergartners aren't necessarily going to fill out their own
No,
feedback,
so they didn't fill out a survey. So what we did was we did focus groups with each one of them. I remember providing some information there. Our elementary kiddos, they did provide feedback from each one of the programs, and we had focus groups that were developed by teachers, so they selected 2 or 3 students per class. They came down and met with either their principal or their principal and myself, and we asked them a series of questions. And I wouldn't say that there were necessarily huge themes that we learned from that. I think I touched on this before. It was interesting in terms of things like students would tell us that they didn't like the questions that followed a story because they were difficult. So then they had to go back and reread. So from a student's perspective, they would look at that and they're like, oh, I don't really like that because the questions aren't easy. From a teacher perspective, we'd say, well, that sounds like a pretty solid question because there's some rigor involved there. We're prompting to do the student what we want them to do, to go back into the reading and closely read and reread. So it's one of those things when there wasn't a clear theme. We asked them about stories that they liked, and what was nice is you go across and you get multiple students telling you different stories that they liked from the same resource and things that they liked. So not every story, just like for adults, you know, not everybody loves every book, but with the kids, the same thing, that they were finding stories within each one of those resources that they liked. A common theme with our Super Kids kiddos, they do like the characters that are in Super Kids, so if you've taken a look at that, there's the group of Super Kids that follow them all the way up, K1, 2, and our K1, 2 kiddos have connected with those characters and do really enjoy them. If there are no other questions, I can.
Mr. Barney?
If it turns out that Super Kids is the right resource for K2 and then either HMH or Wonders for grades 3 through 5, having 2 different programs, I understand you discussed there'd be some maybe transition costs that would have to be associated with that. Overall, to buy the 2 different programs, would that be an increased cost? Or is it essentially like per student, so if we get, you know, all grades at HMH, it'd be the same cost as splitting Super Kids and HMH?
Yeah, so there isn't a huge cost difference when you look at them that way because almost all of them are per student costs. That was shared at a very early teaching and learning committee with all 3 of them. At this point in time, I'll get updated quotes from all 3, and they've kind of shared pricing information with me along the way because there's some different components that go along with it. What I will do is most of these programs offer, if you do multiple years with them, then there's a reduced cost for implementation in later years. And if we think about implementing a program, trying to do it on a 3-year basis probably isn't going to be most beneficial for us, so we'd be forecasting forward and looking at 4 or 5 years worth of this program. So those are the options that I'll provide to the board so that you can see what each one of those looks like and then what that combination looks like. But there isn't, at the end of the day, what we're looking for is the highest quality resource for our kids, and there isn't a significant, what I would call a significant price difference for that K2 to the HMH or Wonders. There are some annual costs that are a little bit, in essence, less with Super Kids because of the resource that it is.
Thank you.
As we move forward with this, we're ultimately decision time. You explained all three are on the approved list, which is a great insight to have at this point, because that was one of our biggest. Now it'll come down potentially to what is or isn't, not refundable, but grant availability for it. And my understanding is the act is going to provide some monies, and it'll just depend on which qualifies for how much. It's just another, won't be an end-all be-all, obviously, but another data point for us to take into consideration.
Right, it's balancing that cost savings, so it's for our early grades that there would be some refundable costs, and there's still some clarity that DPI needs to provide around what elements of the program might be refundable. I've listened to a lot of the calls that, or the Zoom meetings that the Reading Council has had, and there's just a lot of unanswered questions around that, and they bring that up. So, for example, HMH has multiple components. If the Reading Council and DPI haven't reviewed all of the components of HMH, will they then refund me if we fill out the grant application to say we want the full cost of what year one of HMH is? My guess is they're not going to fund, half of what all of those things are. What they've said on the calls is they will refund the elements that they've reviewed and then approved, that they deem necessary to achieving the goals of Act 20. So I think there's still a large amount of clarity that's out there, or there's not a lot of clarity that's out there in terms of some of the questions that districts are asking around Act 20, and hopefully in the coming weeks we'll learn a little bit more. But like I said, each one of the resources meet the heart of what Act 20 is saying, so they don't have any components in them that would prevent us from using them in future years. Next steps for me, I'm meeting with all of our pilot teachers at their schools, so just smaller groups. So I met with the reading review team. They all filled this out, but then there's that one last layer of feedback that I'm going to get from each one of the pilot groups. I'll share all of the data with them, including the achievement data and growth data that I'll share with you regarding our students, so that they can provide one additional layer of recommendation, because I want to make sure their voices are clearly heard in the decision that we're making regarding this resource.
So we're probably looking at another month from a data standpoint.
The data, Chris can attest to this, I was literally compiling it today because we were waiting for a couple last map results to come in. The weather didn't play nice with Germantown.
He's blaming me for the lack of data this evening.
If Chris wouldn't have called off school, I would have all the data that you needed tonight. But
Wow.
I can share that with the board and the Teaching and Learning Committee separately, so you can see that, and then we can talk about it at a future Teaching and Learning Committee, just so that you can see the whole picture that we're looking at.
Potential improvement approval process, obviously through teaching and learning, and then to finance, and then to the full board, would be my guess, or are we looking to go straight, because it's going to be a large dollar purchase? And then my second part of that question would be, on the finance side, we budgeted for this purchase already. Any grant that we're going to receive back would just allow Brittany to bring a budget adjustment, hopefully, to us in our district favor.
Correct. Yeah.
So we're not.
We could.
The point I'm trying to make is we're not dependent on which one gives better grant, because we're financially budgeted for this move regardless of the grant dollars. Those are going to free up, with anticipation, money elsewhere for the district in the future. But that's more a bonus moving forward than it is a consideration, I guess.
Correct. And then to the question around process, the anticipated process that I have is bringing it to Teaching and Learning for approval, finance, then full board.
One last question. Timeline for implementation, because obviously each month we push down the road, we're going to be losing a PD day or planning for.
Yep. I've accepted the thought that I'll have just about one PD day that I can use to provide teachers with the resources that are along here. And that's, I think that is probably the hard deck that I have, is having that day allows me to provide teachers with the first unit of the year. It allows me time to work with the reading review team and pilot teachers, so that in addition to the training that's provided by each one of the companies, our teachers have some insight around what does a getting started actually look like, and from their experience, what are the must-knows right out of the gate, so that when teachers, if they so choose, want to look at the resource over the summer, and when they look at that first unit, they have that, getting started guide, so that they're fully aware and have access to those resources. So if we can get it to that spot where I can still utilize that last PD day, I think we're in a good position. All of our companies, as I worked with them, they've been able to provide us, every time I ask them for, we're going to extend the pilot again, because we still don't know. They've been able to react to that pretty swiftly, so getting those physical resources in our teachers' hands, I'm anticipating will be something that they'll be able to do for us.
What's our target PD day?
April 19th.
Okay. So it's not the day before school started.
Correct. The other benefit there is we will have the in-service days prior to the start of the school year as the second, kind of layer to this, where we can use our trainers from each one of the companies to provide that in-person grade level specific support to our teachers. So it's just that rolling implementation piece where a good portion of the professional development that our teachers experience at the K-5 level next year will be around the reading resource and what the curriculum map and understanding by design process looks like for each one of those units, and making sure that they have time on each one of those days to overview the unit. So when we think about the in-service days, they have an opportunity to overview what does it look like and what are our goals for September. And then they have a September PD day. And then they can do the same thing, overview, forecast forward, what are we looking for until December, because November's kind of a short month, we don't have a PD day there. But the board also did approve teacher work days for our elementary teachers for next year, and part of the recommendation on my side for that was knowing the lift that our teachers will have next year for this reading resource, that I think providing them that time will be beneficial, and they have one that's early in the year in October where they can spend part of that time using that to help them understand the resource and overview the educational goals that they're looking for.
I think it's getting a little nervous as we continue to push this, and we've discussed it. I think it's circumstances out of our hands, but to ensure the right financial path forward for the district, we have to have had to delay this off. It's helped us provide some more data, which is a good thing, some better conversation or continued conversation. But it's nice to hear we still have our window where we're not, by the way, school starts next week, here you go. We're well still ahead of that, with it potentially occurring at the end of this school year, moving in through the summer and then to the start of the school year.
And, once I meet with teachers, so this is in the next couple of weeks, we're going to be ready to go once we have that additional information, and the board will then be able to make that decision with all of it on the table, knowing what Act 20 and the recommendation from the Reading Council is, what our teachers have come forward in terms of their data, what our students have provided in terms of their data, so that there's a pretty clear picture of how each one of these resources has worked in Germantown.
Great. Any other questions? Jake, do you have anything else for us?
That's all I got.
Okay, appreciate it. Item 7, new business. Item 6, unfinished business, we have none. Item 7, new business, we have none. Item 8, take a motion.
Motion to adjourn.
Second?
Sigemoth with the motion, Mr. Pollock with the second. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
We are adjourned at 6:34 PM.